Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and welcome back to the Friendship Quilt Along. Today we are quilting this beautiful bear's claw block with echo ditching and ruler quilting, but using a walking foot. I know this sounds crazy. I really didn't think it was going to work, but I had so much fun playing around with this block. So let's jump on the machine and see how this works with walking foot quilting. So here is our beautiful bear's claw block, and I've gotten started doing some echo ditching around the center bear's claw. And this is a little different from the echo ditching I've been doing with ruler foot quilting. I'm using my walking foot, and I'm using basically the inner prong of the walking foot as a guide. And that could change depending on your walking foot. Sometimes that's a really narrow spacing, sometimes that's right up against the needle, sometimes it's a little wider. But I just thought that was kind of a nice way of guiding my quilting, and it's turning out to be pretty interesting. It's basically about 1/8 of an inch, and I'm echoing the ditch, and this is just a little bit simpler and a little bit faster than stitching in the ditch. I could also do that, and that's honestly what I was considering. I was thinking about stitching right in the ditch, and then I thought, that's going to be really time consuming and slow. And echo ditching is faster because it's not so persnickety. If you wobble out of the ditch a little bit, you don't have to worry about picking it out. You don't have to worry about anything because you're a little space away from it. Now, the one tricky thing is figuring out how to turn corners and keep it consistent. So let me give you some tips. As I'm coming down to an inner corner like this, I'm basically just kind of looking at, okay, where's the midpoint where my needle is in the down position and I've got my nice spacing over here. And, I'm wanting to make sure that I'm kind of in the middle of that little pocket, so that way when I rotate, I'm going to be in the right position for that next angle. So here we go. I rotate, lift the foot, rotate. Always remember, drop the foot back down again. Otherwise, you'll have no tension on the next stitch and your machine's going to gag. So if you lift your foot, always remember, put it back down again. Okay, and so for the outside angle, so here I'm coming up and I'm going to turn an outside corner. This is a little trickier, and because the walking foot is so bulky, it can be hard to see this. And this is why I've taken my ceramic marking pencil and I have marked a line here that's 1/8 of an inch from that triangle, from that ditch. That's where I need to change direction. So as soon as I hit that, basically, I'll change direction and rotate the block around, just like so. And so it takes very little time to do that little bit of marking, but it saves you so much time having to, kind of stitch a little bit and then change the angle and then see if you stitch down further enough. And then oftentimes it's easy to overshoot it. So just doing, going all the way around the bear's claw block to do that little marking and plan that out. And you could also use your marking pencil to plan out and say, okay, well, that angle is going to come in there and let me mark that too. That could save you some time as well, but I can usually eyeball that. I have a lot harder time eyeballing the outer points. Okay, so I undershot there. That's okay. I could just take the stitch manually and shift it over just a little bit. Gotta understand that I am ever so slightly more persnickety on some blocks than I am on others. And on this one in particular, I kind of feel like, if we're going to bother to piece all of these half square triangles, and there were a lot of half square triangles in this particular block, if we're going to bother to piece all of that, and if we're going to bother to make these really cute bear's claws, then we should pay attention to that piecing and honor it by either stitching it in the ditch or stitching around it, so that we're basically kind of saying, this is important. I bothered to piece this, I bothered to make this, this is an important thing. And that's kind of my mentality with stitching in the ditch or echo ditching. That's what you're saying, without any words as you quilt it on your quilt, the way you quilt your quilt, basically. So I'm just rotating around. And this is the one, I would say, downside of using walking foot quilting for this. I overshot, so I'm backing up a stitch here. Wiggle that back. That's okay. Dropping it down, that looks good. But walking foot quilting is ever so slightly slower with this technique than ruler foot quilting would be. However, I don't have a ruler yet that spaces out 1/8 of an inch. I know there are some out there, so take a look at it if you want to do ruler foot quilting for this instead of walking foot quilting. But you can see the downside with walking foot quilting is I'm having to rotate for every single angle. This isn't so bad. You know, as you can see, I have stitched through this whole section in about 5 minutes, and I'm talking at the same time. That's making me go a little slower. So it's not too bad. And if you say, okay, well, one bear claw is going to take 5 minutes to stitch and do this echo ditching, so that means all told this is going to take about 20 minutes to do the whole thing. You know, so you can sit down and have a reasonable estimation for how much time it's going to take. I like that. I like having a time estimate mostly because then I know I can fit it into my schedule. You know, if I've got only 5 minutes to stitch, I probably won't take this project on because I won't be able to finish that entire section of quilting. There we go. I really like this. I think it's nice. Now, as for adding more quilting inside the bear's claw, that's entirely up to you. I'm not going to because I know I don't have to. And the reason is I'm using a batting in my Friendship quilt blocks that has a rating up to, I think, stitching up to 8 inches. And that allows me to get away with leaving that entire space open. I don't have to worry about putting anything in the middle of it because the batting is not going to shift. It's been quilted enough, basically. So I'm not going to stitch anything in there, but a couple ideas if you wanted to do something. You could do more lines of echo ditching, maybe change the spacing a little bit. The reason why I didn't do an internal echo is because it can get just a little bit weird. So that's why I did not do echo ditching to the inside of the bear's claw. But you know, you could fill in with any design that you like that we've used so far if you want. Stippling, we've used stippling, sharp stippling. We've done undulation several times. That's been a lot of fun. So definitely, you know, go back through the videos. If you're wanting to add a little bit more quilting in these areas, you've got lots of designs to choose from, lots of different things that can go in here. So I'm going to continue stitching around my bear's claw, go all the way around it, and then I'm going to figure out a very simple design. I'm thinking just some simple straight lines to go in this inner border. So I went on ahead and moved all the way out to my next border, and I am echo ditching that next border. And so whenever you use the prongs of your walking foot, keep in mind you have two sides. You can run off of either side. So here I am running off of this side. I'm just lining up that prong of my walking foot with the ditch line. That's putting my needle about 1/8 of an inch from the ditch. And I really like that. Very, very minimal quilting, very fast. I mean, I can put my foot down and just speed through this. It's just a straight line. Let the walking foot do its job and feed the quilt forward. And one quick note, guys, for this style of quilting, you do use your feed dogs. So I have my stitch length set to 1.5 millimeters, and that is what is producing this nice small stitch. That is what's doing the work here. And for that reason, I have my slider here set up off the feed dogs so that way they can work, they can grip the back of the quilt and pull it through the machine. Okay, so now I'm going to match up on my thread break. This is where I started quilting. I have already tied off and buried that thread tail. I have 2 thread tails here. They've already been tied off and buried, and I always do that. Whenever I'm going in a sort of circle where I'm going to end up in the place where I started, I always like to go on ahead and tie that off, and then this is how I match up with that so it's a perfect end. Seamless. It's not really the best word for that, but yeah, it works. Basically, I just take careful stitches right to that spot, then I lift my needle up, lift up the foot, and then break nice long thread tails. And I have a much more detailed tutorial on how to tie off and bury thread tails, and I'll make sure to link that up so you can easily find it. Then I just pull on that top thread, and that pulls up a loop, and that loop I pick at it with my needle, and that is the bobbin thread. So now I have both thread tails on the surface of the quilt, and I can take those, tie them in an overhand knot that just ties the threads together so that way they don't come loose separately. And Isocord, the thread that I'm using, is fairly slippery, so I think this is important. And then I run a cheater needle. This is a self-threading needle through the middle layer of the quilt in the batting area, and the cheater needle allows me to just pop the thread tails into the eye and then send them through. And you can see even with gloves on, I can do that in a matter of seconds. So very, very simple. Clip that off. Okay, now it's up to you if you want to add another line of quilting right through the middle. I think that would look pretty good. But the thing about it is I'm feeling a little lazy. I don't really want to mark it. So I'm going to try and eyeball it. And what I mean by that is I'm looking at the seam line here, and I'm looking at the seam line here, and I'm roughly positioning the foot in the middle. Now I could grab a ruler easily and actually measure this and say, okay, well, I'm 3/4 of an inch over here. I'm a little bit less than 3/4 of an inch over here, so let's scooch over just a little bit. I mean, I can be persnickety with this, certainly. You know, it's really just down to how much time you want to spend on your project. I am going to mark just right here, so that way I know where I'm going to be changing direction. And this is what I'm marking here is the edge of the foot. So I'm going to bring the edge of the foot down to line up with that. That's not actually my line to follow and stitch along it. That can be a little confusing. You can mark anything. You can mark the edge of the line where you're just following along that, and that'll work too. I've had a couple people ask and wonder if you can use rulers with a walking foot. And I'd say this is actually a pretty good opportunity to try that. It's not going to work the same way as free motion quilting, but here I'm just pressing this down and it's giving me a guide, and I'm just running the edge of the walking foot right along that, and it's working. You know, so I'd say yes, that kind of works. I don't have anything grippy. This is just a regular, measuring ruler. This is not anything fancy. So I'm just going to come down and kind of eyeball. I think I need to come down 1/2 inch below. I can actually measure that with the ruler, 1 or 2 more stitches. There we go. This is just me experimenting, guys. I'm learning right along with you. I honestly don't know if this is going to work consistently all the way around the block, but I'm having fun. So what I'm doing here, just to describe it a little bit better, I'm lining up the 3/4 of an inch mark. So yeah, there's a quarter, there's a quarter, there's a quarter. I'm lining up that line with the seam line here that is between the bear's claw blocks and that first border. And it's a little bit hard to see because it's black fabric and also because I've already done the echo ditching around those triangles. But that is what is lined up. I've got the 3/4 of an inch mark lined up. I'm pressing the ruler firmly down. Now it looks like I've overstitched, so I'm going to back up a stitch and scooch my walking foot over. Now press firmly and stitch on down. And I don't actually have to, really press hard, because the walking foot's guiding, and pulling the quilt through the machine. Really, the ruler is just there to line up and make sure that the walking foot stays in the right position more than anything else. Okay, so here I know I'm coming up on a change of direction, so I want 3/4 of an inch plus 1/2 inch. So that's 1 1/4 is how far I want the foot to come down. There we go. Because I'm estimating there's about 1/2 inch between the edge of the foot and the needle. And this is going to be something that might change depending on the type of walking foot that you have, how much space you have between the walking foot, the edge of the foot, and the needle. This is really kind of, it might be a case-specific thing just for me that it's working out this way. But I think it does work, as far as using the ruler as a guide and spacing the stitches. I want to say, though, looking at my stitches, that I've gotten a little bit long. And I think I might have hit a button on my machine. These stitches have gone up to 2.5 millimeters long, so they're noticeably longer than my other stitches. But I actually don't think they look that bad. And that can be a decorative element, too, is that you can vary the the length of your stitches, width if you want to do a zigzag, and, some really, like a 4 millimeter stitch, in a decorative area like the center of this border, that could look really nice. That could be a decorative element. And then if you really wanted to stitch it up a notch, changing your thread color might be an idea too, where you go with a longer stitch, a noticeably longer stitch, and you change to a thicker thread and a dynamic thread color too. So all of those cool ideas for stitching it up a notch and making it a little bit more interesting. That is noticeably bigger than my other stitches, but that's okay. I don't think that's a deal breaker by any means. It's making it more interesting. Okay, so I rotated around again. Again, just lining up that 3/4 of an inch mark with the ditch. And this is fast. I mean, this is super, super speedy. I don't have a guide. I don't have a guide bar on this particular walking foot, so I could not use a guide bar to space this out for me. One doesn't attach to this foot. So yeah, I think the ruler is gonna work in place of a guide bar. Of course, you also have to have that in your hand, and it would be a little bit clunkier if it was on this side where I have more limited space. And it would probably also feel a little bit clunkier if I was working on a bigger quilt. But I would say for these small blocks, this is definitely something cool, something new and something cool to play with. So I'm coming on down. I've got one more corner turn, just like so. And I also want to go on ahead and tie off these thread tails. Like I said, I don't like that to wait until I get right up on top of it. I want that already dealt with, so that way it's not a problem as I get close to it. But I'm going to stitch just a little bit further down, and I'll talk you through that. So here we go. I'm going to tie off and bury these first. And the reason I like to do this is because when you have all 4 thread tails end up in the same place, it just makes it more challenging, number one, to figure out what threads go together, you know, where are the tails that match up. And then also, you don't want to tie off all 4 thread tails into a knot. You only want to tie off 2 thread tails at a time. So here I tied that overhand knot, run my cheater needle into the quilt. I flip it over just to double check that and make sure it's not coming out the back. And that looks good. Run it through about 1 inch, pop the thread tails into the eye of that needle, send it through, and make sure that knot pops into the middle layer too. And like I said, I've got another much more detailed tutorial on that on my website, and that's leahday.com/hide threads. Okay, so using this ruler technique, this ruler walking foot quilting, which is crazy, I'm going to try and match up with this line. So I want to go slow and make sure that I'm in line. That looks good. Just take a couple more stitches. There we go. Shazam! It worked out great. I'm delighted by that. So super, super cool quilting. We learned something new, and we can use a ruler as a guide for a walking foot. So from here, I'm going to go around this outer border, and I'm going to do that same echo ditching that we did before. So 1/8 inch spacing away from the ditch. I think that's going to be a beautiful way of finishing that border. And here's what it looked like whenever I finished quilting it. So that's it for this video. I hope you learned a lot. I certainly did by playing around with my walking foot and seeing what I could do. Now, I don't think you can use a walking foot for curvy style rulers. That's probably not going to end up working, but a straight ruler would absolutely help you guide the foot. You don't have to mark the lines then, and it's a little bit faster, especially if you don't have a guide bar for your walking foot. So I hope that this video has given you lots of ideas for exploring walking foot quilting some more. If you'd like to join in the fun and make this beautiful bear's claw block, you can find the quilt pattern at leahday.com/friendship. Until next time, let's go quilt.